My dear Bedoons and other members of the viewing audience, due to my personal circumstances, I have not been able to produce literature on the Bedoon this year as I have in previous years. And at the same time, I've observed that my knowledge is now being shared with a larger audience around the world, for which I thank the Bedoons who have helped me with my research, and especially those who continue to help me with my research and to share this knowledge in the name of truth, justice, and compassion for all human beings. For these reasons, I've decided to use the channel to create videos educating you about the information I have already produced in my doctoral thesis. This will not merely include analysis of historical data, but also include my analyses of contemporary data about the Bedoon in Kuwait and how the Bedoon are framed and talked about in the academic literature. And that's what today's video is about. It's from my doctoral thesis, for which I'll leave the link below, and it discusses how the Bedoon are framed and talked about in the scholarly literature. So I guess this video will be helpful in particular to university students as well as to human rights activists. Specifically, I'm going to tell you how the Bedoon have been portrayed in contemporary discussions around the world by academic scholars. For human rights activists, I aim to teach you about how scholars in the so-called liberal democratic parties in Kuwait have actually set out to help destroy the Bedoon population, in essence supporting the government of Kuwait's ethnic cleansing of your own people through their carefully constructed dialogues on the Bedoon. For this reason, please keep in mind that professors and associate professors of Kuwait University are in a particularly sensitive position, including Professors Al-Najjar, Al-Ansari, Al-Khatib, Al-Gabra, Al-Nakib, and the like, because they are strong members of these nationalist groups and/or interest groups, and have either produced or supported the production of this knowledge that I'm going to speak about today. This material comes from Appendix C, Part 7, Volume 2 of my thesis. In this section of my study, I analysed contemporary scholarly literature on the Bedoon, most of it published from the period of time from the 1980s through to 2017. I analysed the literature and discovered three major meta-themes. These were contemporary colonialism and tribalism theory, the so-called developmental theory approaches, and what I've called the new theory approach. The new theory approach is particularly sensitive because it's less known by scholars outside the field of Kuwait studies, and it contains discussions of the eradication of the Bedoon population in whole or in part, and therefore it meets the criteria as indication of genocide. I should add that having recently seen criticism from a scholar of my work because I have dared to use the terms ethnic cleansing and genocide while other scholars have not, I would like to emphasise that this scholar in particular was obviously unfamiliar with my work and had not bothered to actually read it. As scholars, we are actually supposed to read the work that we reference in journal articles and the like. So if anyone is watching who wants to know what evidence of the intent to genocide the Bedoon really comprises, listen up, because this is but one of many examples I have documented about the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Bedoon in Kuwait by the state of Kuwait, and to some extent, even more importantly, by actual individuals around the world who are complicit in this tragedy. My analysis was qualitative, and it drew from more than 50 different authors, the majority of whom were Kuwaiti or international specialists in the field of Middle East studies. I did not include data from human rights reports per se, though many academic scholars do these days contribute to this type of reporting in Middle East contexts. In other words, I restricted the analysis to what is regarded as scholarly literature. Due to the controversial nature of this literature, I have not disclosed the sources to the public. However, these books are available online and in university libraries. They are all published works or university thesis works. However, the sources that I actually drew my analysis from were made available to the examiners of my thesis, who were the examiners being unknown to me at the time that they examined the work. I hope to publish the names of these sources more widely in the coming years as the topic becomes less politically sensitive and accepted at face value as the international community and Kuwaitis together work to end the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Bedoon people in Kuwait. So in the rest of this video, I'll describe the types of dialogue that takes place within published work in the academic literature about the stateless Bedoon of Kuwait and their broader ethnic group, the Northern Tribes Bedouin in Kuwait, and other Bedoons who are not part of the Bedouin tribes. I will not go into quotations, but limit the video to the thematic descriptors of my research, which describe the actual terms and concepts used by scholars in this field. The three main metathemes I extracted from the literature included contemporary colonialism and tribalism theory, developmental approaches which include modernisation, and the new theory, dialogues of eradication. Going to the first metatheme, contemporary colonialism and tribalism theory, I extracted four major themes. This included negation and selective omissions in the literature about the Bedoon, myths and othering of the Bedoon in the literature, blaming the Bedoon in the literature, and claiming the Bedoons are inferior in the literature. Now, out of each of these four themes, I then extracted further sub-themes. So from negation and selective omission, I extracted the following three themes: negating tribal and ethnic identity and heritage of the Bedoon, the invisible Bedouin, and the active or passive Bedouin stereotypes. From the theme myths and othering of the Bedoon, I extracted three sub-themes. These included othering to produce the foreign migrant national ideology or propaganda about the Bedoon, one that is not true. The second was the Bedoon pretend to be stateless and to have a false identity. And the third was the criminalisation of the Bedoon in Kuwaiti society. From the third theme, I extracted two sub-themes. These included cultural difference is the Bedouins' problem, leading to their lack of assimilation into Kuwaiti society, and new theory of the Bedoon as a low-status tribe or inferior tribal groups of the Bedouin in general. And the last theme, which was the inferiority of the Bedoon, included two themes: the Bedouin as an inferior race and the Bedouin as having inferior tribal and cultural characteristics. Now, in this type of literature, some would talk only about the northern tribes and only about the Bedoon, and then other authors would talk about Bedouins in general, meaning the northern and or the southern tribes Bedouin. From the second meta-theme, which I called development approaches, which also included theories of modernisation, there were three different major themes that I extracted. These included the psychological development approach, the cultural development approach, and the resources approach. Now, from the psychological development approach, I extracted 7 themes. They include intellectual and personality characteristics, the Bedouin mind, the Bedouin personality, the Bedouin attitude, the Bedouin capacity for productivity, the lazy, unproductive Bedouin, and the ignorant Bedouin illiterates. Please excuse me if I offend you by the way these themes are described, but what I am doing, or what I was doing with the research, follows standard procedures where I attempt to keep the names of the themes as close to what is actually said in the data, being the scholarly literature, as possible. The next major theme was the cultural development approach, and it included a number of themes: misrepresentations of dangerous social activities of the Bedoon, cultural practices of the Bedoon, recreational practices of the Bedoon, educational practices of the Bedoon, and employment practices of the Bedoon. The next part of this theme included discussions that reflected the cultural hygiene theory or approach, and this included both desertization and feminist critiques. Now, desertization was introduced by scholars of Kuwait studies to describe the Bedouin in general and the Bedoon in particular. This included discourse on urban pollution by the Bedouin and the Bedouin as a national security threat. And this also reflects government policy that was introduced by academic scholars to the government of Kuwait back in the 1960s, which actually led to the Bedoon being rendered stateless permanently, in particular from the 1980s onward. Other themes included more dangerous tribal activities, religious practices, and problems with personal appearance that were sub-themes or components of the broader concept of desertization. And under scholarly feminist critiques, I extracted further sub-themes, including Bedouins with women's representation, the concept that Bedouins who had women's representation or who sought to represent their women folk were misguided. Bedouins won't support the purchase of weapons of mass destruction from the United States, and Bedouins are religious fanatics and terrorists. And interestingly, in one case, the same author complained that Bedouins wouldn't purchase weapons of mass destruction from the United States, but that at the same time they were also religious fanatics and terrorists, even though they were refusing to buy the weapons of mass destruction because they wanted peace in Kuwait and the rest of the world, obviously. And then the final major theme of this section, developmental approaches and modernisation, included the resources approach, which I believe is one typical from discussions of modernisation theory. And this was basically centred around the deprivation of resources, which is a policy that all Bedoons will be very familiar with. And this included 5 sub-themes that I extracted from the literature, including the deprivation of resources targeting Bedouins in desert settlements and popular housing areas, which over time historically turned into just the Bedoon subgroup. Delay in education expenditure to the Bedouin at all levels, which then resulted in a lack of education expenditure to the Bedoon in particular, which all Bedoons will be familiar with again. Lack of expenditure on Bedouin children's education by policy design, and arguments for the withdrawal of state education expenditure, and arguments for the withdrawal of resources from civil society so that the Bedoon could not access those resources as members of Kuwait's civil society. Now finally, the last major meta theme, which was the new theory, eradication dialogues, included 3 different major themes, being Bedouin and Bedoon eradication dialogues and emissions of the 1980s and 1990s, promotion of Bedouin and Bedoon eradication in peacetime, and contemporary citizenship requirements of the Bedouin to become Kuwaiti citizens. Now, if you're a sensitive person or under the age of 18, I would ask you to turn off the video and not to listen further, because the following information is very confronting. For those who are still listening, the 2 major themes that I extracted from the theme of Bedouin and Bedoon eradication dialogues and emissions of the 1980s through to the 1990s included two themes: erasure or administrative ethnic cleansing, expulsion and killing, and ethnic cleansing directives, by which I mean actually instructions to ethnically cleanse the Bedouin who comprised the Bedoon of Kuwait in the 1990s. And then from those 2 themes, I extracted further themes. So from discussions, dialogues on erasure, expulsion and killing, sub-themes, just 2 sub-themes included minimization of the facts, understatements of the facts or lack of elaboration on the facts, being social facts, or facts, just social facts. Sorry, I was going to say facts in law, but no, this is restricted to sociology. And then the second theme was the selective omission of relevant and available information, and authors attempting to redirect attention away from relevant and substantial issues by using their skills in dialogue to redirect those conversations elsewhere when talking about a particular topic. Now, the other theme that was drawn from Bedouin Bedoon eradication dialogues and emissions was ethnic cleansing directives, and this included 3 different sub-themes: instructions to ethnically cleanse issued by government officials in the media, misrepresentation of the Bedouin and Bedoon identity as Iraqi citizens, and dual stateless targets, the Bedouin and Palestinians as the 5th column collaborators at war with the state of Kuwait and its people. The second major theme that comes out of this meta-theme New Theory Eradication Dialogues was promotion of Bedouin and Bedoon eradication in peacetime. Now, from this theme, I extracted 6 sub-themes. They included the first one, urban history, urban planning, urban space approaches. The Bedouin described as basically incompatible with or antithesis to urban culture. The second was tribal culture as tribal primitivism, squatting and slum dwelling, and chaos within those physical spaces. Psychological and spiritual disturbance, and the destruction or the need for the Bedouin to vacate their homes. The fourth theme was the withdrawal of state resources and impoverishment, blaming the Bedouin for physical degradation and filth and refuge around the areas which they inhabited. The fifth was Bedouin settlements on desert land requiring evacuation and eradication, those particular terms being the terms that are used in the literature. And the sixth one was population transfer, eradication and offshoring or encampment of the whole Bedoon population. Some of these ideas have reached the media through the human rights literature, and some of them haven't. And then the final theme in this last meta theme that I'm discussing, which means that the video is coming to a close, was contemporary citizenship requirements of the Bedouin tribes of Kuwait. This is a common topic in the Kuwaiti national news, as all Bedoons will know. And I extracted two major themes from this sub-theme, which were the Bedouin are not Kuwaiti nor citizens, and the enforcement of true citizenship of the Bedouin. Now, from the first one, the Bedouin are not Kuwaiti or citizens, I extracted 5 sub-themes, which include the Bedouin are not capable of citizenship and democracy. And I thank Professor Abdullah Al-Hajjari for some of these themes, which are in his original academic thesis from 2004. So just to repeat, the Bedouin are not capable of citizenship and democracy. The Bedouin are disloyal to the state because they are loyal to the tribe and the emir. The Bedouin are not real or true Kuwaitis. The Bedouin are not original Kuwaitis. And finally, the Bedouin are not pure Kuwaitis. And then from the second major theme of this that I derived from the overarching theme of contemporary citizenship requirements of the Bedouin, which was called Enforcement of True Citizenship of the Bedouin, included 4 different themes. The first one is dehumanization, attacks on marriage and founding of the families and the Bedouin tribe. The second is genetic makeup, sexuality and marriage practices. The third is vermin and animals. And again, I apologize for the nature of this language, but I am not responsible for it. I am just describing what other people have said. And the fourth one is negative eugenics and biosecurity, protecting the Hadar state. And excuse me if I pronounce that incorrectly. And from that, I extracted 5 sub-themes, including biological procedures required to prove real, true, or pure Kuwaitiness and nationality, Bedouin DNA, Bedouin blood, Bedouin fingerprints, and language testing in the United Kingdom. I'd just like to make a final note regarding the language testing in the United Kingdom. This takes place, according to my understanding, my limited understanding of refugee studies, this takes place only for 3 groups, or at least it did at the time that I analysed the literature up to 2017. The 3 groups were the Kuwaiti Bedoon, who were claiming refugee status in the UK, Palestinians claiming refugee status in the UK, and Syrians claiming refugee status in the UK. And I'd just like to let readers know that, interestingly, all of those 3 different groups from 3 different national areas of the Middle East are from the northern Bedouin tribes. So hence we can see that there is some kind of other, more serious undertone about the reasons why the Bedoon of Kuwait, as members of the northern tribes, have been targeted, and that this has some kind of connection to the government of the United Kingdom, not just in colonial times, but through to the present day. And I hope that in time other scholars will come into the field of Kuwait area studies and will study this absolutely bizarre and shameful phenomena. Thank you for listening to my video today. May God bless you and your loved ones. And once again, I thank so much the people who have helped me and supported me with my research to date. I pray you and your families stay safe during the challenging period of COVID. and I hope that you'll join me for my next video. God bless and goodbye for now. Thank you.